Hello and welcome to No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The centre's move to sharply cut taxes on petrol and diesel over the weekend has sparked off a fresh row with several opposition states. With inflation hurting people across the board, the finance minister announced an excise duty cut of 8 rupees per litre on petrol and 6 rupees per litre on diesel. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman then put the onus on state governments to reduce taxes that they levy on fuel, which is the value-added tax or VAT. Her statement comes weeks after the Prime Minister urged states to do the same, setting off a war of words. Some states like Kerala, Rajasthan and Maharashtra have reduced VAT in the last few days, but others are reluctant and have accused the centre of only doing a partial reduction in central taxes after sharply hiking them for many years. Among those who's been strongly critical of the centre is Tamil Nadu's Finance Minister, Mr. P. Thiagarajan, who joins us on NDTV this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. If I could begin by asking you, when you said in some detail that you felt that the centre's request to states to now reduce VAT was unfair, it was unreasonable, what did you mean by that? Why did you feel so strongly to say that?
First, thank you for having me on, Nidhi. Second, I would say I don't recall anywhere them using the words requests. They gave demands and then I think the Union Finance Minister used the word exhort. I don't think the Constitution allows any of this to happen. I think the Constitution allows states to manage their own finances to whatever little extent that we have left. We don't have any direct taxes. We used to have indirect taxes. That has been subsumed by the GST. If we are to run our own governments, we have the right under the Constitution, again reinforced by the recent GST ruling, that we have the right to legislate our taxes as we see fit. So the base point to me is when the Union government raised excise, and that too shifted it from excise, pure excise to cess and surcharge, 3 times on petrol and 10 times on diesel. They did not consult the states even one word. They cut the share given to us, even though they took the total taxes from 9 rupees and changed to 32 rupees on petrol and 3 rupees and change on 32 rupees to diesel. They cut the portion that's shareable to us and made us lose income. At that time, they had no compassion, no consideration, no coordination, no iota of feeling for the states or their rights. All of a sudden, for political reasons, they start cutting because they've had bad tax policy for 7-8 years and the chickens are coming home to roost. And now they're trying to make fake villains out of us. This is atrocious. I mean, it's hypocritical. It's shameless hypocrisy.
You're saying they're trying to make fake villains out of you. Are you saying that even after this excise duty cut, the centre actually still has very high taxes on petrol and diesel both because the hike since 2014 has been so high?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So it went up from 9 rupees 40 paisa to 32 rupees 50 paisa. They cut 5 rupees once and 8 rupees once. You take away 13 rupees, there's still 19 rupees. That's still more than double the rate that was being taxed when this government came to power. Let's take diesel. It was 3 rupees 40 paisa or something. They took it up to 32, they cut it by 10 and then another 8 or 6 or whatever they've cut. So they're still 4 or 5 times where they were. Most states have not done anything like it, even though my party was not in power the last 7 years, even though the ADMK raised it 2 or 3 times, they raised it by 10, 15, 20%. We came to power before it occurred to the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister of India to cut. We cut the taxes by 3 rupees a litre on petrol and we increased the subsidies on diesel because we were not able to ensure that if we cut the taxes, it would go to the targeted people. See, petrol is a lot easier. It's mostly used by bikes. But diesel, some of it is transport, some of it is logistics, some of it is big SUVs and rich people's vehicles. So we found increased subsidies to fisher people and to transport and to agriculture, our transport corporations, and we left that as it is. Now, I want to say one more thing. Because, no, please let me just finish this one point.
Yeah.
Because most states' VATs are at least some portion ad valorem, meaning after the union's excise has been levied, on that total we levy a tax. We have actually lost revenue both times. When they cut the first time, we lost about 1,000 crores. When they cut the second time, we lost about 1,000 crores. So why is that? Because our taxes are 13% per litre on petrol after the excise has been levied. So when they cut 5 rupees, we lost 65 paisa. When they cut 8 rupees, we lost 1 rupee.
No,
I'm asking, when they cut 10 rupees, we lost 1 rupee.
Are you saying that there is no scope for the state, for your state government to reduce VAT? And I'm asking also in the context of the fact that other states have done it and it would provide huge relief to the common man. So are you saying that the scope for that is almost Zero.
I am saying that we will act on the best information available. I am saying that we have one of the best statistical outcomes of any government in India. We brought the revenue deficit down from 60,000 something crores to 40,000 something crores. Our fiscal deficit is half that of the union government. Our per capita income is twice that of the national average. Our inflation is only 5% when the national inflation is 8%. I'm saying we know what we're doing. We don't need anybody else to tell us what to do. When we are ready, we will do what we are ready to do to manage our economy. The Constitution gives us the right to do it, and we will do it. We don't need dictation from people who perform worse than us telling us how to do our job.
It's very evident from your comments that this confrontation between the states, and not just your state, and the centre is increasingly becoming an issue. How do we govern the country if that happens?
No, let me finish. We don't want any confrontation. We do our jobs. We keep our head down. We focus on our responsibilities. We do what the Constitution tells us to do, and we deliver superior results. Ask anybody in this country whether any other state has cut the revenue deficit and the fiscal deficit so much in 1 year, has managed to keep inflation at 5% and real growth 2 years in a row, including the COVID year, above zero and above the national average by a lot. 2021, the national economy sank by 7.6%. We grew by 1.5. Last year, we grew by 9. So I'm saying we know what we're doing, and we are happy to do our work, and we don't like other people extra constitutionally trying to authoritarianly force us to do things we don't want to do. We are producing results. Are you jealous? Are you worried that we are better, so you're trying to cut us down? Leave us to do our work. We are producing results in inflation, in revenue deficit, in per capita income. In every way, we are producing results. Why should somebody else dictate to us how we should act? Did they ask us when they raised the rates? Why should they tell us when they cut, why should I cut? Is there anything in the Constitution that says whenever they cut, I should cut? If so, why did they raise and not ask us to raise when they did it? It makes no sense. Are we all living in some collective madness here that the Constitution doesn't apply? Just because somebody says so, we all have to jump?
Well, you're using very strong words, extra-constitutional, authoritarian. Are you saying that is the way the centre, is that the centre's approach to states? What has happened to, does cooperative federalism actually exist at all on the ground, in reality?
If you shift the government's revenues from 6% cesses and surcharges to 20% cesses and surcharges, if you start legislating on subjects that are not union subjects in the Constitution, that are state subjects, if you start imposing conditions on states in their borrowings, which have never been seen historically in the history of any government in independent India, if you start legislating about minor ports and dams and stuff which have been always state subjects, if you start saying cooperation, which is a state subject, is going to be legislated from Delhi, how is this cooperative federalism? Please explain to me.
Okay, so you clearly see it as overstepping by the centre on a range of issues. Mr. Thiagarajan, then what is the way forward? Because is there any meeting point between states and the centre? Whether it's on fuel, whether it's on GST? Yeah.
No, let me ask you please one question. You have been in this business a long time. Please put yourself back 8 years. Imagine that the Prime Minister was Dr. Manmohan Singh. And imagine that the current Prime Minister was then the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Imagine that the union government had taken all the steps that this union government has taken in the last 8 years. How do you think the then Chief Minister of Gujarat would have reacted? Do you think he would have said, yes sir, whatever you say we'll do? He was the biggest defender of states' rights, of federalism, right? Just put yourself back. I mean, we all seem to have forgotten that there used to be a constitutional application of the separation of powers between the state and the union. Why is it now that all power should be in Delhi? It makes no sense to me.
Can I ask you a couple of political questions since we have you here? One is on the general atmosphere in the country at the moment, the kind of communal polarization we are seeing, the headlines about the whole Mandir Masjid dispute, etc. How do you see what is going on in the country at the moment, these divisions and of course the impact it has on us as a society and our economy?
It is heartbreaking and it is self-defeating. Any country where you don't have a harmonious social construct, context and environment, you cannot achieve your full potential for growth. It's not rocket science, it's basic logic. So, of course, it's heartbreaking for us, but our Chief Minister is very clear, and we espouse our values every day, in every speech, in every bill, in every action. And as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, we want it to continue to be the kind of socially harmonious, inclusive society that we have already had. Every year I go and take part in many Christian functions and many Islamic functions, though I'm practicing Saivite and my family has a long association with the Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple, the Subramanian Ayyappan temple, so forth. I go devoutly with my children, with my family, but I don't have any reason to intrude into anybody else's faith. In fact, as Aringe Ranna said, if a man is truly a follower of God, then the first thing he thinks about is, I want to be a good human being and be kind to all the other people who are also the children of God, irrespective of what faith they have. So both in our values, in our hearts, in our actions, we are very clear who we are, and the Chief Minister will ensure that that kind of, separatist forces and othering will be avoided in Tamil Nadu and kept under check.
See, that's a very strong ideological position that the DMK has. And I'm coming to my next question, which is that just the other day at the Chintan Shivar in Udaipur, Rahul Gandhi, who is a close ally of yours, said that regional parties do not have the ideology to take on the BJP, only the Congress does. Some of the Congress's allies are pretty upset about that remark. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I'm the finance minister. It's not my job to comment on politics, so I'm going to let that slide. We know who we are. We do what we do. I'm not really going to react to somebody else's comments.
Mr. Thiagarajan, if I could just ask you one more thing, which is that Rahul Gandhi also made a comparison to Sri Lanka's economy, saying that India is going the Sri Lanka way, using graphics on employment, inflation and communal tensions to cite that. Do you agree with that assessment?
Look, I've made a speech in Delhi about a month ago. I'll reiterate that it's not exactly the same, because I'm not sure that we'll get to Sri Lanka status anytime soon, because we are a more resilient and a more diverse and a larger scale country. But I made the point that we are in this strange kind of vortex where the power, the authority, the money, all of it gets concentrated in Delhi, and that within Delhi in one or two hands. And on the other hand, the results keep getting worse and worse. I don't think there's any reliable statistic, because the government stops collecting data when it doesn't like the outcomes. But I don't think there's any statistic you can see anywhere that shows that the economy has slowed, that joblessness has increased, and that there are serious concerns about the future. There is a structural issue here. I just want to make one point. There's a structural issue here. It is impossible for one place or two people or 200 people in one city like Delhi to manage effectively a country of 1.4 billion people and great diversity between states, between rural and urban, between different industries, different priorities, different per capita incomes, etc. Anybody who studies complexity of systems will say that it is an exercise doomed to failure. If you try to run one homogenized, one kind of system show from Delhi across a country of this structure, this scale, diversity, this complexity, it will fail. The only question is when and after how much damage. That's all.
Mr. Thiagarajan, those words of caution there coming from you. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV today. Thank you. Well, as the Indian economy faces a lot of headwinds, like much of the world's economies are at the moment, here to talk to us about these high prices of fuel, food and other commodities, the high inflation that India is seeing and economic growth overall, we have two former chief economic advisors on the program tonight. First, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, who only months earlier stepped down as CEA to the Modi government. Mr. Subramanian, thank you very much for joining us. I first wanted to ask you about this battle between centre and the states over fuel taxes. Over the weekend, the centre reduced taxes on petrol and diesel, which is a relief for the common man. But a lot of states are also pushing back. Some have reduced VAT, which they can, but others are pushing back, like Tamil Nadu. We just had the finance minister on, who was saying that the centre had hiked taxes so much from 2014 and that this doesn't really go very far. How should we see this?
Nidhi, I think we have to look at this using facts. I'm going to take a couple of examples. Let's take Maharashtra and compare it to a neighboring state, Gujarat. Even after the 2 rupee cut that has happened, that Maharashtra has done yesterday, the state taxes that Maharashtra has per litre is 29 rupees. In contrast, for Gujarat, it is 12 rupees. And if you take on average, actually about 60 rupees is, let's say, the, is overall taxes. That means they're actually looking at almost half the share of it being states and half being center. And the center has already cut. So I think, when you look at the facts and also, I don't think the economic theory is any different for states versus center. Much like if states have to balance their budget, center has to do that as well. And, if almost half of these taxes are being accounted for, by state level taxes, I think then, I think the point is very clear. Similarly, if you look at another, let me take one more example, West Bengal. West Bengal's, petrol basically per liter tax is 26 rupees. A neighboring state, Assam, is only 12 rupees. That's about 2.5 times more. You take Rajasthan and compare it to UP. Rajasthan is basically 24.5 rupees. Taking into account actually the change, the 2.5 rupees cut they've done. In contrast, UP is at 15 rupees. So I think if you look at, there are many states who actually have reduced their VAT significantly. And, and I think when you look at the facts, I think you can clearly separate what is, what is the fact and what is the narrative and who's walking the talk and who's only talking.
Well, the complaint by the Tamil Nadu finance minister is that there is no consultation by the centre, that it's only a top-down approach. So do you think that a change in approach is needed so that there is genuine cooperative federalism?
See, these are aspects that I think I'm not going to comment upon, because that is actually the dynamic. When I was in government, I would have commented, but now I think I don't have visibility on that aspect. But what I will mention is that, decisions on eventually on VAT versus excise duty is basically the respective domain of the center and the states. I think, when the center has clearly cut, the excise duty and the facts that I'm pointing out, there's been 2 rounds of cut. If you remember, actually, the first round happened just before Diwali. And now if you look at then 5 rupees on petrol and now, 8 rupees, together 13 rupees. In contrast, in many states, and especially those that actually, are the ones that I've mentioned, have not followed up. And I think, when you start looking at the facts, there's actually a lot of narrative building, which is quite different from the facts clearly. I think, and that's something that, middle class folks need to recognize, because eventually, unlike, let's say, the poor or the rich ended up saving during the, the COVID period because they couldn't consume. The poor are being given subsidies, like, for instance, food, 800 million people. It is the middle class that actually, will get the maximum benefit out of these excise duty cuts and the VAT cuts. So I think, on the one hand, either if these states are indeed caring for the middle class citizen, I think the facts are very clear.
But looking at the concerns about inflation, now the whole world is reeling from inflation. However, you see the US at a 40-year high, a cost of living crisis in Germany, the UK. Inflation is clearly not something that's hurting India alone. But there are many experts we've spoken to who say that as far as India is concerned, the combination of a high WPI inflation that's been in double digits now for 13 straight months and retail inflation which is at an 8-year high, that in particular is hurting India. How do you see this?
So, I actually focus on consumer price inflation because that is what eventually the consumer, people like you and me face. And that is what monetary policy also focuses on. Yes, some part of WPI inflation does get transmitted into CPI. In that context, I think we should, policymakers should, focus on WPI as well. But outcome eventually is CPI inflation. And as you rightly mentioned, actually, this is a global phenomenon. And I must remind you, I think we are basically, we're just getting out of a crisis when, the Ukraine war happened. Ukraine war has actually meant that, for instance, Indonesia, put restrictions on exports of palm oil. You have sunflower oil getting impacted because Ukraine was a big supplier, and these are factors. So it's pertinent, therefore, to compare with a previous crisis. Take the global financial crisis. When the macroeconomic response was shambolic, you had basically for 18 months, double-digit inflation, fiscal deficit that was 2.5 times that of the peer economies. You had a 6% current account deficit. In contrast, very, very prudent policy during COVID has ensured that our macro fundamentals are good. As a result, India, even in this sort of a topsy-turvy or difficult and global environment, will be the fastest growing economy, and even and in a relative sense will have lower inflation than other countries. Do remember, 2% is the inflation that Europe and US have actually typically had. So for them to have 8% inflation is almost 4 times. In contrast, compared to the previous crisis period of about 14%, 13% inflation, now we're at 7.5%. So I think we need to, using facts and figures, recognize where good work is done and I think give credit where is due therefore.
At the end, let me ask you a semi-political question. Rahul Gandhi just days ago compared India to Sri Lanka. He said that India was going the Sri Lanka way. Is that apples and oranges here?
I can tell you, I don't know, where is that economics coming from? I can tell you for a fact that he's going to be proved wrong on this. I've just given you the facts, how we are much better than, so many economies, even the advanced economies. So I think this is just, clearly not based on economics. I don't think even he's ever studied economics. So I don't think I would take that seriously at all.
All right, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV. Well, joining us now, another former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, this time under the UPA government, Professor Kaushik Basu, joining us from the United States. Professor Basu, thank you for being with us. First of all, the centre's decision to reduce this excise duty on fuel, how much is it actually going to help? Because there is a real concern that inflation has become entrenched in India. Are you worried about that as well?
Yes, Nidhi, let me clarify. I think this particular move to lower the taxes and give an immediate relief to people, it is high time. I mean, this should have been done because it's the poor and even the middle classes who are being hit by this inflation very badly. But you have to be very careful. As you do this, lower the taxes, your fiscal deficit could go up. And if the fiscal deficit goes up, then your long run, you're feeding into the inflation even more. If I may step back and point to something about the inflation, which in fact we should be much clearer about this simply because today, fortunately or unfortunately, the inflation is not something which is brewing inside the country. It is something that is coming from the international situation, the supply chain bottlenecks, which is causing the inflation. That being so, it is important, given that the responsibility is really of the initial inflation is not with us, but it's coming from outside. We should be much clearer about its effect on the people, and it is the poorer and the smaller businesses who are getting it.
Right, but much of the world is dealing with high inflation at the moment. In the US, it's at a 40-year high, the UK, other parts of Europe as well. However, in India, you have the WPI inflation, which has been in double digits for more than a year now, continuously, and retail inflation at an 8-year high as well. So is this combination hurting all of us much more here in India at the moment?
I think you're pointing to something exactly valid, because what happened initially, the WPI inflation, the wholesale inflation, when that went into double digits, which happened 13 months ago, more than a year ago, we were not paying enough attention to that because it's the retail inflation which hits people directly that we had our eyes fixed on. But now you realize what's happening is retail inflation 7.8%, which is high, but by international standards, not really that high. Wholesale price inflation, very, very high by any standards. And there's been some controversy I've seen. The last time we had at this level of wholesale price inflation was about 24 years ago, late 1990s. And something is happening because of this. Wholesale price inflation being higher than retail inflation means that for small businesses, micro enterprises, the price at which they are buying things, which is the wholesale price, that's shooting up. They are not being able to pass it all off elsewhere. So our small businesses are being hit very, very badly. And one fallout of that is unemployment. On the inflation figure, I agree with which lots of people will point out that the world situation is probably more grim than what's happening in India. But the employment situation is very bad in India. And youth unemployment in particular, the data that is coming out is India is one of the worst performing countries in the world. And this squeeze between the wholesale price and the retail price, wholesale price shooting up, means small businesses are floundering, they are employing fewer people. Another thing is the retail inflation will come under more pressure because as the wholesale price inflation, which is at 15.1%, 15.08%, and remember, since you pointed out that this is not something which has happened over the last few months, but over 13 months, there is no base effect which is causing this inflation. This is real wholesale price inflation. This is going to transmit more to the retail inflation. My own calculation is retail inflation is going to cross the 9% mark. This is going to happen, but government should put in every effort to make sure it does not go into double digit and try to turn it around there. This is a momentum that has come from elsewhere, but we are not paying enough policy attention to the smaller producers and the workers, the farmers who are paying the big brunt of the price inflation and the squeeze between the wholesale and the retail.
Well, finally, Professor Basu, just wanted to ask you about, the social fabric, communal tensions, India very deeply polarized at the moment. How does that impact economic growth, if it does?
Nidhi, on the inflation, frankly, I don't think that the social tensions, the political tensions is causing the inflation. But I do worry about India's long-run growth prospects because study after study shows long-run growth does not just depend on your economic policies. Trust among people, confidence in ordinary things in life. There are lots of documentation that plays a role. And I do worry that the political polarization, the divisiveness in society that we are seeing is going to damage our long-run growth prospects. And The Economist magazine had a cover story last week about India's prospects, the potential being very high. And I agree. If you look at the fundamentals, we have great strengths, but the politics can undo it because if it becomes divisive, India is not going to grow. And on the growth scenario, by the way, I should point out that yes, over 21, 22, India's growth was very high. But that shows nothing but climbing out from the huge dip which had taken place. India's was one of the worst performing economies during 2019, 2020. So the climb back gives you a 1-year growth boost. The future is to be seen. We have the fundamentals, but if the politics remains so divided, India's growth prospects will begin to flounder.
All right. Professor Basu, thanks very much for joining us. And that's it on No Spin tonight. See you again tomorrow. Good night.